So we've actually increased our portfolio in budget support quite dramatically, I would say, in the last 5 to 6 years. Really because Cambodia, having given such good performance at the MDG level and really achieving results in reducing poverty, we've seen the need to actually move into accompanying government reforms much more systematically and giving much more ownership to government in that reform process. And budget support is one of the best tools, really, that we have in our toolbox to do that. We do still have some projects, of course, and there we tend to work with our member states very closely because we are engaged in Cambodia in a joint programming context. So first and foremost, we look towards our member states to bring in their expertise. And in particular, member states can often do a lot of twinning arrangements, which brings in skills and knowledge from Europe that we as the Commission find difficult. So it's also, I would say, a win-win for us to work with them. And we have a lot of grants to civil society actors as well to support on I would say, the professionalization of civil society actors, but also to support their advocacy and lobbying efforts in the country to feed into public policy debates and discussions. We have, I want to say 8 or 9, 4 resident member states, and we also collaborate very closely with Switzerland as a like-minded partner. So joint programming in Cambodia started basically in 2012 with a feasibility study, where with the member states present in Cambodia and some non-resident member states, we agreed that there was great value in being more joined up and working closer together. So we did the feasibility study, which also was very positive in terms of its conclusion. It was the right time for many of us. It was an opportune moment, which we then discussed with our heads of mission, who agreed that we should go forward. So we developed our joint program, which covers the government's programming period, which is 2014 to 2018. And we agreed in that process that we would have an annual review internally to the European partners. So we developed a results matrix based on government indicators for different sectors where we operate and support Cambodia's reform agenda. And then I think later in that process, we suddenly realized, well, that's an excellent opportunity for high-level policy dialogue as part of that annual review process. And that's where we are today. We've done our first annual review. We've had a whole year of different consultations and culminating with a high-level policy discussion with government on our results and plus an information session with the National Parliament. And we're just reviewing our results matrix at the moment to see if we need to make any changes. And we've agreed that there has to be some changes, particularly from that came out of the consultations with the private sector and civil society, questioning the evidence that we had for different indicators. So yeah, that's where we are today. Yes, indeed. All the resident member states are involved in joint programming. Plus, we associate Switzerland as a like-minded partner. And we also have a number of non-resident member states who have cooperation programs in Cambodia to larger or smaller extents, basically. They're not, I mean, they are involved. I wouldn't say they're as actively involved. Some of them were able to join us at specific points of, for example, of policy dialogue related to the progress report. But it's mainly driven by the core group of member states who are present in country and the delegation. I think for us, what was critical at the beginning was to have a series of discussions with the member states about why we wanted to do joint programming, what benefits were each of us going to get out of it individually, as well as collectively, what were our expectations for joint programming, and how did we want to do it? How did we want to have a joint, or what kind of joint program did we want in Cambodia? So we had a number of discussions. We had a sort of retreat modality where we mapped out on the wall all our different expectations, what we thought headquarters wanted for our different member states and hierarchies. And we then had a very, very open discussion about that. And I think that was critical for us to understand each other and how each other works and our different constituencies, And there were issues that we needed to address then, which we did with better communication, with joint letters to headquarters for all of us. For me, that was a really critical starting point. Once we got past that, we did a joint political economy analysis of the situation in Cambodia, which again we discussed internally. And then we said, yeah, we actually feel like we're all on the same page and we all know what we want to achieve in Cambodia and how we want to do it. Now let's put it in a joint program. If you don't do that and you try to just bring things together, I don't think you have the good basis from which to carry forward the implementation, because you have to recognize it's additional work. It requires additional skills, and it requires me in any case, to every single moment in my work to have the reflex, what do I need to tell the member states in the joint programming context? Do we have a joint policy brief on this? What is our joint position? Do I need to consult with them before going into larger consultation processes with other development partners? So it does require additional work. So by being much closer to each other at the beginning, I think we got over that hurdle quite, relatively quickly. No, none of them actually provide budget support in Cambodia. We've had very interesting discussions about that, which again is part of getting to know each other and what we can and can't do. And I think we have a very good common understanding that budget support can do certain things, and all the member states are extremely supportive of us, the Commission, doing budget support because they recognize the value that it can do in certain things, in certain areas. And in all of those areas where we work with budget support, a member state also works with other modalities. And so we complement and we work together to reinforce our message. We have existing joint policy briefs for all of those areas too, so we've already agreed on what our key messages are to government and where we want to go. And it's been great, particularly in decentralization, for example, where we've just started a budget support program, that both Sweden, Switzerland and Germany, who are all involved in the sector, came to me afterwards once we had the decision to move forward budget support, saying, this is fantastic. With your budget support, we're going to be able to shift this not on budget program reform of the government, which is critical, to an on budget reform. We're going to be able to move so much through national procedures and national systems, which we couldn't do previously because we were working in a project approach. And so knowing that they're behind us to do that, I think is fantastic. And now we're just saying, okay, now with the rest of the money that we have from the member states, what do we do in support of capacity? What do we just do in support of skills? What do we do in support of other things that complement the policy shifts that we've brought in with the budget support? So it's a very good situation to be in, I think, because it's very supportive of our budget support agenda, which we know that some member states question. I think for us in Cambodia, what was really important was, with joint programming, we feel like we speak with one European voice, which I think gives us more space in the discussion with government. In Cambodia, the development partner community and government haven't had a full consultation together since 2012. But us, European group, with our joint programming, we were able to have one last year between us and the government, which was incredibly important for us and very, very useful in terms of actually realizing that with government we share very closely the challenges that we're grappling with in the different sectors. So it brought us in some ways that opportunity, which we wouldn't have had otherwise. I think by putting also everything in the joint program, government realized that we are by far the biggest grant provider in country, which is also very, very important in terms of how we are seen and how we are perceived and the leverage that we have in our policy dialogue. And I also think that with joint programming, as I mentioned earlier, we are able to make use of all the different tools that we have and all the different modalities that we have. So we can have budget support, we can have twinning because other member states can do that. We can have technical assistance, we can have loans because some member states can do that. We can have investment linked to loans. We can have all sorts of types of support together, which is a much better package and a much better position to be in when you're grappling with, yes, government reforms that are difficult to implement, are challenging, that require a whole of government response, which is not always easy in a developing country context. By having lots of different things that we can bring to the table, I think we're recognized as a partner that really tries to respond to government's challenge, but we recognize government's leadership, which is not always the situation for others. I think for us, the critical thing was our results matrix, because it set indicators, using government indicators actually for most of the sectors, but where there weren't government indicators, we took our own indicators. It's a very short results matrix. It tried to capture for each area or each outcome of the strategy 2 or 3 indicators that would give would show the trends in those areas. So we had a lot of discussions internally about what those indicators would be, the choice of them, why this would be a good way to look at trends, for example, in governance or in natural resource management or in human resource capacity like education and health. So that again was a very good process for us to agree on where our priorities were, because we tried to choose indicators that really, really reflected the key priorities and the key trends that we wanted to support. And then by having the results matrix, we then were able, it was natural that in our first year implementation report, then we would look at how we did based on how those indicators had evolved in fact, it was over the year of 2014, 2015. And that then led into policy dialogue with government, because in some areas, yes, things had evolved positively, in other areas they hadn't, and that's actually the challenge for us. It's where things are going good and well, yes, we still have to invest in ongoing policy dialogue and invest in our future programs, but it's where things are not going well, where we know that it's a priority, that we really have to think about what are the root causes, why is this happening, we're not in the right policy context, or we're not providing the right support, or what more can we do? So that discussion was really, really interesting. And we had it not only with civil society and the private sector, but we also had it with government and with parliament. So you get a wide range of views about where they see the EU, what should the EU's role be, how are we perceived as adding value to work in different sectors, how are we perceived as bringing in expertise or skills or not. So I think for us that really kept joint programming alive, because by going through that review process, having the discussion with all these different actors, then our next obvious sort of step was, well, we need to review some of our results matrix indicators as well, because there were other things that were important that as the situation has evolved, we wanted to capture climate change and Cambodia's nationally determined contribution. We wanted to capture something more related to gender. It's an emerging priority for the EU. So by building those in, now we've gone through another process of reviewing the results matrix. We know that we'll be doing another report. We realize that we don't have a joint policy brief on higher education. So it starts a dynamic whereby you get lots of other bits of work, which is, joint programming is additional work, but at the same time, it's added value, because when it came to doing the midterm review, for example, I had a huge range of resources on which to draw, because I had member states and colleagues who had worked in all of these sectors, we have a division of labour across sectors, who were able to give me so much information that you really feel that there is a movement. But if we hadn't had a results matrix and we hadn't done the progress review and we hadn't gone through that policy dialogue process, we might still have just a document on the shelf, because you need to give momentum and impetus to a strategy, and that means we need to do work. It's our strategy. We need to take it forward, and constantly reminding the group and working together. Then that is why joint programming is still relevant, because we make it relevant because it's touching our work, and every month we talk about it in our coordination meetings. Yeah, so we have for us, we have, we use the term joint action. So joint action to us is both having joint policy briefs in certain areas, so where we want to make sure that we pass key messages to government through different channels. It's also joint implementation in terms of delegated cooperation, so us delegating money to another member state, or member states between them also delegating to each other the implementation of funding. It's also coming together to act in a pooled method or a pooled manner, supporting a capacity development fund, or having a joint position in a global funding process like the Global Fund for Health. We have a joint local position on that. So there's lots of different ways that we have envisaged joint action. Related to the delegations portfolio, we have delegated cooperation now with Sweden, with Germany, and with France, and we're looking at further delegated cooperation, if possible, also with Switzerland, who are currently being pillar assessed. So I can see that we have ourselves very actively engaged in joint implementation with our member states. Yeah.